This is a very personal story to my family, but I think your readers might find it as fascinating as I do. My mother grew up in an infamous mental institution in Massachusetts, now closed, and I won't name the facility for privacy's sake. She was placed in state custody in 1948 at 6 years old because my grandmother, a Portuguese gypsy immigrant and closet psychotic, claimed she was mentally disturbed. In actuality, my grandmother was just not capable of raising her, so she successfully pawned her off on the state. My mother was not only a beautiful and innocent child, but was totally mentally capable and 100% sane. In those days, there was no system in place to accurately assessing a child's medical condition. They simply took the parents' word for it. After living at various orphanages and state facilities, she ended up at this institution just outside of Boston. The place is notorious for paranormal activity, even on the outer grounds where some of the buildings once stood. She was about 12 when she got there. She said that there were many physically and mentally incapacitated young people there, and the stories she told us about the school, or institution, were both heartbreaking and terrifying. There were mental abuses, deprivations, beatings, medical experiments on patients, and cruel punishments galore. So-called professional care was barbaric, and even the terminology was outdated. My mother's own records, which I've seen myself, showed her mental assessment as moron, even though she said she was never really tested by any mental health professional. When she was around 13, she began helping the patients whenever she could. She would bandage their injuries, break up fights, and speak to the matrons on behalf of those who could not speak. This created enemies among the staff, who knew she wasn't handicapped and who felt she was a threat to their employment. Therefore, whenever they could, they punished her severely. One such punishment led to a horrifying encounter with the supernatural. One dark, stormy afternoon, Mom had words with a matron, trying to tell her that certain handicapped children were frightened of the thunder and that they should not be forced to go outside to exercise that afternoon. The matron appeared to give in, then asked my mother to please go down into the cellar of the building to get to the rain gear for those who wanted to go outside. Mom was terrified of that cellar, and the matron knew it. There was this long, steep, narrow, and rickety stairway, ending at a long, dark hallway with no windows and just a tiny yellowish light bulb in the ceiling. At the end of the hallway, there was a cabinet that contained raincoats, boots, etc. When my mother hesitantly stepped onto the stairway, the matron slammed a door, bolted it shut behind her, and shut off the light. My mother screamed and pounded on the door for an hour, only to be laughed at by matrons who had been instructed to let her spend the entire night down there. The stairs being steep and dangerous, she decided that she would rather creep to the bottom and at least huddle on the damp floor. As she descended, she noticed a dim light coming from the long hallway beneath her. She came to the bottom of the stairs and looked around. She said she saw a man in a dark jumpsuit about 20 feet from her, leaping against a wall and just smiling at her. She thought he must have been a custodian, so she walked towards him, asking him to please let her out. But as she approached him, he kept getting further away. She realized he was not a sullen being, and that the dim light seemed to be coming from his outline. The light began to fade, and she found herself screaming again, only in the total dark of the dingy basement. She was disoriented and stumbled forward until she bumped into the cabinet which held the rain gear. As she squinted in the dark, she began to make out shapes forming on either side of the cabinet. What appeared to be a pair of detached hands forming a clawed shape were each coming from around opposite sides of the cabinet and heading for her. She turned and ran, faint with terror, until she tripped on the bottom step. Frozen with fear, she could only sit at the bottom step and cover her face with her hands. After a minute or so, she peeked through her fingers down the hallway. The strange dim light was back. She chanced to look down, and what she saw filled her with horror. One of the smoky floating hands were reaching for her skirt, as if to pull at it. She again screamed and ran back up the stairs, tripping and falling several times in the dark, convinced she was being chased. The air was cold, and she heard a strange rustling sound behind her as she frequently climbed. When she reached the top of the stairs, she pounded furiously on the door and found that it had been unlocked. She never found out who unlocked it, but she didn't care either. She ran all the way to her room and hid on her bed. She never told the school staff what had happened, fearing reprisals, and she never set foot in that cellar again, despite the punishment of defiance. She's fine today, despite her horrific youth. There were many other strange things happening during her stay, but I'm considering a book about them, and I wanted to reap the benefits of the sales if it happens. I'll save the creepiest stuff for that. I've had many paranormal experiences since I was a young child. At the age of 4, my mother and grandmother would visit the graves of my father and grandfather, staying all day. I would play with the little girl there, while my grandmother and mother sat and talked. They believed I had an imaginary playmate. Both are now dead themselves. I decided to check the records of the cemetery, and had little trouble since it is a small place. I found one girl that could have been the one that I played with. Her name was Mary Jane Walker, and she died in 1866, at the age of 9 years of age. My husband and I decided to see if we could find the girl's grave. I told him to check the back of the cemetery because that was where we played. He found the grave. I asked Mary Jane if I could take her picture. I took 3 of the grave, and one of my husband, sitting on a tree stump not far away. I had the pictures developed. All the pictures were normal, except for the one of my husband where there appears to be a vortex in it. I've looked for all the usual problems, but can find no rational explanation for this. I now feel that I have proof of my friend's existence. My husband and I rented a home in southwest Detroit in the 1980s that was very haunted. The first thing that happened was when I was waiting for the gas company to come turn the gas on. I felt as though there was someone watching me, and I smelled pipe tobacco. I figured, okay, I'm alone in a strange place. I also thought that maybe the people who lived in the front part of the house used pipe tobacco. I found out later that these people were from India and were visiting that country. They moved out within a week of returning to the US. All the problems in the house seemed to originate in the attic. There was a log cabin built up there for children to play in. It was complete with glass in the windows and a drawstring latch for the door. I was only in there once, but the feeling of uneasiness I felt was real. We never allowed our children to play in it. The attic door had no lock, but my 5-year-old daughter got locked in and was screaming for us to let her out. Although you could hear any noise from upstairs, we never heard her. The door opened on its own. I started to dream about an old Indian woman with a pockmarked face. Since this was a dream, I never told anyone about it. One day, a woman I had become friendly with asked me if my mother was visiting. I told her I sure hope not, since my mother was dead. She said that she saw a woman with long black hair in my bedroom window. This sort of freaked me out, since I was dreaming of that Indian woman, and she had long black hair. One day this friend was visiting me, and we were sitting in the kitchen having coffee and talking about nothing really. She seemed to go into a daze, and was starting to go up to my attic. In fact, she was insisting that she was going. I got her back to the table and sitting down when something punched her head hard enough to leave a red mark. She left and refused to come visit anymore. My husband and I had cleaned out the basement, but yet my kids found a Ouija board down there. They showed us where it was, and we got rid of it right away. We don't mess with that thing. Things seemed to quiet down for a couple of weeks when the apartment in front of us was rented to a young couple. They started to have problems right away. The keys hanging on the wall would begin to sway. The rocker in the front room would start rocking by itself. At first, things only happened at night, but people decided to contact this thing, and things got bad from then. She would get phone calls, and when she answered, no one would be on the line, except one time. She told me a voice told her to get out. We are Christians, and decided enough was enough. We had to have help. I turned on the radio to listen to evangelical echoes, and called a prayer line for suggestions on what to do. This program wasn't on yet, but another one was, and someone on that program was praying in the spirit. Suddenly from the basement came an unearthly howl. Needless to say, this woman and I got out of the house and waited on the front porches for our husbands to get home. While all this was going on, my husband never noticed anything. One night, my nephew was spending the night, and while he was praying, this thing shot from our apartment to the other one, banging things in its haste to leave. My nephew refused to stay another night. One night, my husband was in bed sleeping, and I was on my way up when I asked the man in the next apartment to go wake him up and tell him to come sleep on the couch. He asked me what was wrong, and I told him I could see my husband in pieces. He did, and the couch was occupied that night. The only thing my husband noticed was that one night we were watching TV, and it sounded like a dresser was being dragged down the stairs. He heard that. We moved from there, and the next place was no better. Whatever was there caused arguments. My nephew and his then girlfriend were constantly fighting, and it got so bad that my husband and I started fighting as well. This was something we normally didn't do. We had the normal arguments that married people usually have, but this was getting serious. Even one of my children was being affected by this thing. It was appearing to her as a little girl talking to her. At first it was nice to her, but as time went on, it was starting to get mean. We had bought this one house, and it might sound silly, but the best thing that ever happened was that an arsonist burned us out, and we had to move. We have had no problems since. I don't believe this was a ghost, but rather a demon, and why it hasn't followed us, I have no idea, but I thank God that it hasn't. I have more stories, but I've taken up enough time as it is. I'm glad that I can finally tell this story without fear of people ridiculing me. There's a place in Smithfield, Virginia called Bacon's Castle. It's not really a castle, just a gigantic plantation home. They give tours there on a daily basis. It was in the summer of 2003 that I went with a summer creative writing group to tour this magnificent home and plantation. As we toured the home, the tour guide told us all of the kinds of stories of happenings and how the house was shifted from family to family. When we went up the stairs, we were greeted by a sudden draft. As my friends and I sauntered through the home, it didn't get warmer. In fact, it got colder. The best part was when we reached the room where the woman and her husband would have stayed. There was also a small cradle in the center of the room. The tour guide spoke of a woman during the Civil War who stayed in the room for months after her baby was born because something went wrong with the birth, and the child was terribly sick. When the child died, the woman wouldn't leave the cradle. She remained there, convinced she had to rock her to sleep. She wouldn't eat or sleep, and eventually, she too died. As I stared into the room, I didn't notice anything. My friend Crystal had asked me if I felt a breeze. When I said I didn't, she said she didn't either, and pointed at the cradle, which was swaying back and forth noticeably. I didn't really think much of it, and after everyone left, I took a picture and then followed my friends up the stairs to the attic. A few weeks later, I was looking through my pictures, and something caught my eye in the picture of the room with the cradle in it. Sitting in front of the cradle was a woman dressed in Victorian-style dress. She was transparent, and a wispy hand had gripped the cradle. I looked even closer, and it looked as though she was smiling. Hello, my name is Ray, and I would like to share with you the experiences that happened to my small family in 1996. We had been transferred to the Houston area from San Antonio and found a 2-story 4-bedroom home in the Clear Lake City area. A real fix-it-upper, and it was the worst looking home in a very nice community called Green Acres. My brother-in-law Robert and her sister helped us for 6 months in remodeling, cleaning up, and making the place a nice home. Robert had sold his own home 2 years earlier and lived in a travel trailer, but missed his home. He jumped in and was happy to do most of the work and was proud of the results. A month after the house was finished, we found out that Robert had terminal cancer and had less than 6 months to live. The trailer was small, and so my wife and I decided to bring Robert into our home for his final days. We put him downstairs in the formal living room, and with the help of hospice, we knew we could help Robert with a peaceful and quiet death. This was not the case. Robert fought hard for his life and was terrified of death because he had fought in Vietnam and had killed many. He didn't know what was waiting for him on the other side. The end came with Robert fighting to get out of bed. The look on his face was one of horror. As per his request, he was left in his room for 6 hours after his death, and then the funeral home was called and Robert left. Or did he? The week after the funeral, things started not being right. Odd bumps and sounds from downstairs. Late at night, our dog would not go downstairs after dark, and furniture being moved. One morning, the living room sofa was standing on end with all the cushions still in place. Dining room chairs would be taken and lined along the living room wall, and mirrors would vibrate. We called the hospice minister to the house, and he blessed every room, but Robert still didn't leave. We did. The house stood vacant for a while, and new people moved in, but their stay was short. Neighbors say 2 families came and left. It has been 8 years now, and just a while back I was in the area and went by the home. It sits vacant again with a sale sign in the front yard, standing in front of the window of the room in which Robert died. As I stood there, remembering our last few months at home, a chill ran down my back, and I quickly got into my car to drive away. I sent a story to the site about 2 months ago. Is it my imagination or something paranormal? Well, since then, some new things have happened, and I found out some interesting information that I didn't know before. When I first sent out my story, I told my sister-in-law Jenna about it. She's a Jehovah's Witness too, but a little bit more open-minded than my mother-in-law. Anyway, I told her what I had wrote, and she told me she had a girlfriend when she was a teenager, about 15 years ago, that lived next door to her. The side where I heard the whispering, in the house where the old couple had died. I believe her family bought the house after the couple died. Anyway, she told her that her friend was a little odd because she had been sleeping with her parents at night, but Jenna had found out later why. One night, she had stayed the night at her friend's house, and they slept in her friend's bed. Early in the morning, Jenna had woken up for some reason and noticed that her friend was squirming a lot and moaning, almost like she was doing the deed with someone, but no one was there. Her arms were at her side. So Jenna thought maybe she was having a dream. Then she thought that maybe she had seen imprints in her friend's body. She got startled with this and woke her friend up and told her what she had witnessed. Her friend got so upset about it that she didn't want to talk about it at all and never did. To say the least, Jenna never got asked again to stay another night. Then there is the other story that my mother-in-law told me recently about my other sister-in-law's house, Linda, which is ironically across the street from my mother-in-law's, in the other house. About a shadow that lingers in her hallway, shaped like a person. They have all seen it, including my mother-in-law. She swears that there is an explanation for this, but even she has admitted that she can't find one. When she told me about the shadow, I got real nervous, and I started to get goosebumps and got real cold. I told her sometime last year when I stayed the night at Linda's house. I was sleeping on her couch in the living room, my back to the hallway. There was a small light on where the fish tank was, so it wasn't completely dark. For some reason I woke up and turned around, and I saw this dark shadow move from the open hallway and disappear into the instance of Linda's kitchen. I was startled at first, but then got up to investigate things to see maybe it was the shadow of the fish tank, but there was no way it could have been with the position where the tank was. So I went back to sleeping, thinking it was just my imagination, and I never told anyone of that incident. That was until my mother-in-law said something. She told me not to say anything about it to Linda because she gets freaked out about it, and she said she'll still be looking for a logical explanation for it. Good luck on finding one in all 3 houses, I was thinking to myself. But one last thing. Back at my mother-in-law's house, a couple of weeks ago my niece Christine was staying the night, and my niece told me that when she got to the bathroom in the middle of the night, she came out running, screaming, and petrified out of the hallway. She told my niece, crying hysterically, that when she turned the corner to go into the hallway, that she saw a shadow figure walking towards her. My niece went to look, and nothing was there, and my 2-year-old daughter will not go near that hallway at all. One time I went to carry her down there to show her nothing was down there at all, and she started crying real hard, and grabbing my neck, and wouldn't let go, shaking badly. So whatever is in my mother-in-law's house is probably the same thing that are in the other 2 homes. Makes me wonder if it goes on in the other neighbors' houses. I was doing some just for fun ghost hunting with a couple of my friends one night in a cemetery on an old gravel road. Two of my friends were out in the cemetery looking around, and my other friend decided to stay in the car. As the two guys were out in the far corner of the cemetery, I looked to the center of the graveyard and seen something that made me lose my breath for a few seconds. A blurry gray figure floated above one of the gravestones, and then looked to run through the air across 3 other stones, and then drop right behind another stone. After it disappeared, I asked my friend in the car with me if he had seen it too, and he said he did, and he was just as freaked out as me. It was not light that created this, because it was pitch black out there. It was my first, and so far only time, I've seen something like a ghost. Thank you for letting me share my story. I know this one was kinda short, but I appreciate it anyway. Hi, my name is Louise, and I live in Oxfordshire, England. The story I'm about to tell you happened only a few weeks ago and scared me and my friend to death. It was about 9:30 on a Sunday night, and I was bored, so I decided to call my friend Heather. We were talking about the usual when all of a sudden you could hear someone on the line breathing. Heather and I both said at the same time, "Do you hear that?" As we listened, it got louder until there was complete silence. At first we thought maybe one of our brothers or sisters were messing about and picked up the phone on the other end. We both checked our houses and no one was in there. My parents had gone out for a meal and my brother and sister were out, and Heather didn't have any siblings, and there's only one phone in her house. Anyways, we forgot about it, and after about 10 minutes of talking, we heard it again, and this time, the voice said, "Help, I'm close." We both really freaked out, and said what the voice repeated it again, and then went. I told Heather that I would phone her later, and about an hour later, I phoned back, and we didn't hear anything for a while until the shriek came from the phone, from what sounded like a girl. We got so scared, and as soon as our parents got home, I told them what happened, and they said maybe our phone lines got crossed with someone else's. We still don't know who was on the line to this day. I know this wasn't very scary, but thanks for reading. Well, I've been a ghost hunter for quite some time now. I've submitted a few areas under the California section of the haunted places. I recently moved to Arkansas and bought a home in April. 3-in-1 rock house with a huge pond on 1.6 acres in Boonville, Arkansas. I fell in love with this house as soon as I saw that it said "For Sale by Owner" sign right in front of it. I called the number, and they were selling it for $48,000. I thought, my God, this is cheap for such a beautiful home. I moved in. I have a 9-year-old son and 1 cat. About the end of July, I started hearing and seeing things. To begin with, I was laying in bed one night, and my 9-year-old and 6-year-old, who was visiting from California, were asleep in their rooms. All the lights were out. My bedroom door meets the living room. I was lying on my left side looking out into the black of the living room, and I heard what sounded like someone walking in it. Now, my sons sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and come sleep with me, so naturally I thought it was them. I called out their name. No answer. Then I thought maybe it was my cat, but then I noticed her laying at my feet on the bed. It really sounded like someone was walking from the kitchen in the living room entrance towards my room. Second, My television is hooked up to the stereo because the speaker on the TV is blown. Well, when I have to be at work at 11 p.m., I usually take a shower around 9:45 p.m., and my 9-year-old goes over to his father's house. One night, I turned my stereo on and put a disc in it, 5-disc CD changer. It was on disc 4, song number 11. There were 2 songs, and it should have switched to disc 5 after it was done with song 12. I took my shower and had the stereo loud enough to where I could hear it. All of a sudden, I didn't feel the vibration of the music anymore. I thought, well, maybe it's at a quiet part. When I got out of the shower, I still heard nothing. I put my ear to the door. Nothing. I went out and looked at the stereo, and it was not on CD anymore, but on FM radio on 100.1. And that is not a station at all. It's just fuzz. There was no one else in the house but me and my cat. That was on a Friday night. 2 days later, on a Sunday night, my son and I were watching television around the same time, between 9:45 and 10 p.m., in the middle of television. The radio goes from auxiliary to FM radio, 100.1, fuzz. My son says, "Mom, what did you do? I was watching that." I told him I didn't do anything. On a Saturday, my son was at his father's, and I was there alone with the cat, and she started going crazy. At one point, she was standing in the doorway of my room in the living room, looking at me. She meowed and took off like crazy into the back bedroom belonging to my youngest son. She came racing back into the living room. Just then I heard a loud boom coming from the room, like something fell. It shook the entire house. My stomach had butterflies in it then, and I got up to go see. My son won tall dresser with small bionicle toys on it, but they were still all on there. There wasn't anything else that could fall from any place. I've always heard pipes rattling under the house since I moved in. Out of the corner of my eye, I always see things dart quickly about. I haven't seen it fall on, but I know it moves quick. I haven't took pictures of my home yet, or of it for that matter. Also, I have a 2-car garage. Sometimes when me and my son pull up from school, both garage doors are closed. In the morning, sometimes the right one is open. I've never really been a great believer, but for the past 8 or so years, since me and my mom moved from our old flat to our new house, I've experienced numerous experiences. The first one I was about 6. My bedroom is the box room, and so it's small. My bed touches each side of the room with the door to the left. I was laying in bed waiting for my grandma, who was babysitting, to bring me water. I looked up at the wall and saw a strange shadow. It was like a side profile of someone's head. I could see the nose, mouth, and hair clearly. It could have been my own shadow, since the only light came from the ceiling, and I was lying down in bed. I watched it for a few seconds, then it seemed to fade before my eyes. I thought it was just because I was tired, and so I ignored it. I had no further experiences until 7 years later, in 2003. I was laying in bed once again, the light off about 12 o'clock at night. I was really tired and was trying to fall asleep. My bedroom had been rearranged so that the door was opposite my bed, and one side of my bed was pushed against the wall. I had my back to the wall and was staring into the darkness when I felt a cold breeze on the back of my neck. Thinking it was just a drought, I rolled over the face of the wall. On the wall, probably 3 inches from my face, was another face. I could tell it was a man, and he had a black hood up, All I could see of his face was a pair of cold eyes, and what I can only describe as green paint, a face paint on his cheek. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, thinking I was just seeing things, and when I opened them again, the face was still there. I don't know how long I stared at it, but in the end, I fell asleep, and in the morning, could find no trace of what was there the night before. These sightings carried on for weeks, always appearing on the wall at night. I didn't tell my mom about the face, but asked if I could move my bed back to the original place. We moved it, and I slept peacefully that night. The following night I went to bed about 2 o'clock, since I'd been up watching a movie on television. I got in bed as usual, and rolled over to face the radiator, like I'd done for years, but the face was there again. This time, however, it was more vivid and real. It seemed to be sneering in the dark, and more threatening than before. I rolled over so my back was to the wall, but I could feel the cold breeze that I had felt the last few weeks whenever the face appeared. I pulled the covers around me, refusing to look back at the face. The incidents got less frequent over the weeks, and I believed that the face was going. One night, I was sat at my computer in the corner of my living room. I have a cockatiel whose cage is right next to the computer desk, who was asleep, and my mom was in the kitchen making a drink. I didn't really notice anything until I heard my bird start to hiss and back away into the corner of the cage. Wondering what frightened him, I heard a scraping noise. I looked to the side of the computer to see my glass moving towards the edge of the desk. There was no way it could be moving, because of our house being set on a rise, because it is where it should be sliding the other way. I lifted my hand to stop the glass from falling off the desk. When I touched it, the glass was cold, even though I hadn't had a cold drink in it. The strangest thing was when I went to push the glass back, I couldn't. Something was trying to push the glass. I had to shove it quite hard before I could get the glass to move. When I did, my bird came back to the front of the cage and looked as though nothing had happened. I'd gone to bed earlier than my mom that night and must have been asleep when she came up. Once again, the face was there, but this time, the presence was really strong. My bedroom was icy cold when it normally is the hottest room in the house. Almost 1 o'clock, I wake up shivering and could feel something gripping my arm, but as I come to, it released its grip. I rolled over to see the face once again, but it looked different. The smirk had gone, and it looked more angry than anything else. I didn't sleep that night, and I couldn't sleep in the room, so I spent the night sat on my sofa with the lights on downstairs. When my mom came down in the morning, she was shocked to see me up, but I just said I had woken up early and came down. I didn't want her to know. Later that afternoon, we were having dinner when she asked if I had a nightmare last night. I couldn't recall anything but the face and cold hand, so I asked why. She said she had heard me talking in my sleep, which I had never done before that. She said I was telling someone to get away and don't touch me over and over. Then after about 5 minutes, I was quieter and mumbling things like, "Why are you doing this?" and "just go away." When I asked her what time, she said it was about 12:30, just before I woke up with a hand gripping my arm. I haven't seen the face or had any strange experiences since that night, and I'm not quite sure what happened after. I don't know if I did something to make it all go away, and that was why the man's face looks so angry, but I'm glad they're gone. I still expect to see the face every night, but so far I haven't. I finally told my mom about it all, and she asked if I wanted to have the house blessed, but I said no, although the scary face did no harm to anyone, and it's gone now anyway. And before you leave, please leave a comment, like, and subscribe to this channel, because I say so and you have to, and you listen to me, okay? Right now. Okay, bye. See you guys. Hope you enjoyed the 40-minute video.